Hello and welcome. It is February 10th, 2025. And how cool is that it's the 10th? And I'm reading chapter 10 today. Chapter 10 of my book, Turn Your Magic All the Way Up, a ridiculous guide to discovering yourself after narcissistic abuse. Available on Amazon in Kindle, Paperback, also Audiobook on audible.com, read by me. Or just tune in here every week and I'm reading it for free. Also, I wrote this book with a Spotify playlist, and the link to that playlist will be in the description below. I think music is everything, honestly, and sure couldn't have written this book without it. So it's the soundtrack that goes along with what I was listening to when I wrote the book, if you're interested. Are we ready? I will say, this is the longest chapter that I have in this book, so I may break this into two parts. We'll see. I'm going to try to muscle my way all the way through it. Hang in there. Ready? Chapter 10. Narc number 3, the addict. Always the victim one. Also, trigger warning, there's going to be talk of drugs and a lot of porn and sex talk probably too. Just so you know what you're getting into. Here we go. Song, I Want to Get Better by ATC and the Ready Set. Pardon. I was in a good place, or so I thought, when I found Narc number 3 3 months later. Narc number 2 had left me more broken than I thought possible, but I found I was a lot stronger than I thought, and I mistakenly felt ready to date again. From everything I had read, once you face the fact of what your relationship with a narc had truly been about, that it wasn't real and that narcissistic abuse is a real thing, you just must accept it and heal at your own pace. Some people can't date for years. Some can hop back in the very next month. It's all about where you are in the journey. You were going to have to confront and test the new set of rules and boundaries you established for yourself, no matter if you started dating right away or waited a decade. It was all going to be a brand new learning period. When you finally decide to start dating again, is all up to you and if you feel you are ready. I overestimated my abilities and paid a heavy price by walking right into my third narcissistic relationship in a row. I felt that after a few months off work, lots of hiking, a shit ton of self-help YouTube videos, self-help books about codependency and narcissism, finding Lisa A. Romano and at the Narc Hunter online, some intense soul-searching and self-administered therapy, I was ready to dip my toe back into dating. I felt I was ready to listen to my gut this time after ignoring it over and over with number 2. I thought I would never fall for a narcissist again. See life lesson number 2. Never say never. I had discovered that returning to a desk job was officially off the table at this point because I still couldn't even speak to people without crying, and stress was not something I could handle. I was still fragile and raw. Any stressor would cause a collapse. So I focused on my healing, figured out where I'd be moving to next, and made my plans to try to find a different kind of job. Because I was quitting corporate America, I would no longer be able to afford my nice apartment in Irvine, California, and had to break my lease. In a strange and serendipitous way, I found that my complex had a domestic disturbance clause, and because of my restraining orders with Narc number 2, I was able to exit my lease without any additional fees or penalty at all. Yes! Just another example of good things happening to those with good energy and intentions. The universe had my back once again. Song Beautiful Trauma by Pink. I got a job at a feed store. I was supposed to be delivering hay and not having to deal with people, just drive around dropping shit off and listening to music, and that sounded perfect to me. Unfortunately, the owners of the store chose to put me behind the desk instead, which would eventually lead me to another breakdown. As I stated before, I was just not in a place to be able to handle dealing with people and stress. However, for a short time, I was thrilled to be using my horse knowledge and background again, so I gave it a go. I had found a month-to-month condo to rent nearby, and things were looking up. But I was all alone, and the world was still shut down from COVID. So, coming from a very unhealthy place of being worried I'd die alone, I went back to Tinder. No! Narc number 3 kind of looked like me. We were both tall with colorful faux hawk hair. What's weird is our first interaction mirrored my interaction with number 2, and that alone should have stopped me in my tracks as a giant red flag. Him, you look fun, but I think you already know that. Me, are we twins? I feel like we could be twins. He was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. Goth/industrial, multicolor hair like me, and he classified himself as both non-binary and bisexual, worlds I had never even thought about exploring. I was intrigued and thought maybe by branching out to someone completely different, I would avoid running into another narcissist. They come in all shapes, sizes, and genders, dear ones. Don't let yourself get fooled like I did. I have since learned that most narcs are bisexual because to them, fuel is fuel and a hole is a hole. The human attached to it is irrelevant. That's how little they consider the other person. We met on January 8th, 2021. Red flag right away was that I couldn't find his damn house for the life of me. I drove back and forth, getting frustrated that he wasn't more helpful in finding him. My gut was screaming, run! It feels uncomfortable already. Run! He should be standing outside waving you down, but he isn't even caring that you're lost. Run! But I did it again. I ignored it. I explained it away as being paranoid after the trauma from the last 2 narcs instead of recognizing it for the giant red flag that it was. Damn it. It was all because I was so lonely, and being lonely is a dangerous place for your heart to be. You accept less than you deserve when you're desperate for someone to love you. His house was dark and foreboding. He had a roommate he didn't want to disturb, so I entered through the door directly connected to his bedroom. His room was very sexual dungeon-like. He had an enormous self-made 4-poster bed that he laid on the whole time I was there, while I sat in a chair at the edge of it. It was a little awkward. He talked and talked and talked, and I admit I kind of loved it, but again, it was all a perfect sign of a narcissist. A, the conversation was all about him. He never paused to ask anything at all about me. B, he was testing my empathy by oversharing his trauma stories way too quickly. C, he was just oversharing in general. I kept rationalizing that even though I got the feeling this guy wasn't quote-unquote the one, I was open to see where it might lead. I felt I could just date him without getting too attached. Do I even know myself? And I could practice my boundaries and use my new skills. I didn't know just how unprepared I was until it was too late. For our second date, he came to my condo, and he still had diarrhea of the mouth, talking about himself the whole time. This time it sank in that he wasn't acting interested in me or asking me any questions at all. I was put on pause and took a step back. He was definitely owning the conversation time, and I wondered if he even noticed. Still, I was glad for the company, and when I finally spoke up about how I hadn't really had much of a chance to say anything about myself, he let me talk for a little bit. Narc number 3 had a hell of a backstory when it came to drugs and addiction. He said he'd been a meth addict, but was currently clean. Lie detector tests indicate he was not telling the truth. I had experimented with meth with Narc number 2 a little. See the upcoming drugs chapter for more about that, and was still curious about it. I admit it. I truly feel that this is when the setup began. And from my current vantage point, it really does feel like our whole relationship was a setup and that I was just his quote-unquote mark. I think he specifically looked for someone on Tinder in a richer neighborhood than his, and when he saw that I rode horses, he probably assumed that I had money. He was wrong about that part. Oops. I was newly arrived from Texas, and he read that as naive, gullible, and ready for the pickings. Unfortunately, he was correct. Song Halo by Depeche Mode. Somewhere around our second or third date, Narc number 3 proposed 2 paths for us. A clean path where we could go snowboarding that very weekend, or he felt he, quote unquote, wasn't quite ready to put down meth just yet. And since I had mentioned that I was still curious, we could always try that path, hint, hint, wink, wink. This was a huge turning point in the relationship. I weighed my options. This guy was a black sheep, and his 2 days of storytelling might as well have been a red fucking banner full of nearly all the same warning signs I got from number 2. Their childhoods were nearly identically traumatic. The similarities were uncanny. Tales of woe and bad luck abounded. And yet, he knew all the proper lingo to use to ease my concerns. Just enough. He'd been through therapy. He said he'd been clean for 5 years using AA for strength and could easily do it again. He was a functional drug user, blah, blah, blah. Here was my chance to try all the drugs I had been curious about my whole life with someone who knew where to go to get them, who knew what was good, what was safe, and what wasn't. If I was ever going to play with this side of life, it was now or never. I approached it with a mentality of experimentation and play. I didn't know I was temporarily signing my soul over to the devil and forgot to take into consideration the fact that I was still a love addict. In another foreshadowing moment, similar to my quote-unquote no spark realization with number 2, I panicked when Narc number 3 early on in the relationship as well. It was my gut screaming at me. I wrote Narc number 3 a letter saying I thought he was a beautiful person. It was still early. But all his red flags had me so nervous that I just didn't think this was a good idea. I drove to his house to drop off his snowboard and the letter, and though I don't remember how or why, he did what narcs do. He slyly changed my mind and hoovered me into staying with him. I had been trying to leave nicely, and they just can't allow that. I was ignoring my instincts again, and I decided to stay. I never did get to go snowboarding with him. That was just more narc future faking. And so began my experimentation with crystal meth, aka Tina, quote unquote. I will get into the details of my firsthand experience with illicit substances later in the drugs chapter, but this relationship was run by Tina, which is what meth is referred to by most users. This relationship was a threesome with Tina from the very fucking start. I just didn't know it. Narc number 3 not only enjoyed being high all the time, but he could blame his abuse and narcissism on Tina as an easy scapegoat. He always had a way to slither out of responsibility, that one. All narcs get their fuel in different ways. Some feed off admiration for how they dress, what they drive, how smart they are, etc. Narc number 3, I discovered, got his narcissistic supply from the attention he got with his skills on the dance floor and with his abilities in the bedroom. It was at this time I learned that Tina was a sexually stimulating drug and a huge part of its draw. I don't know how I had made it through life without hearing about that little tidbit of information, but after the purposeful mind games from Narc number 2, especially when it came to anything about sex, I was just happy to finally doing the quote-unquote fucking like rabbits part of a new relationship. I felt like I was moving on. Song Frustrated by Lauren Sanderson. Red flag, the first time we had sex, Narc number 3 broke out every sexual toy he had, which was a lot of them. He either did it to try to impress me, or maybe he figured that one time together might be all we were going to get. I don't know. But all it really did was intimidate the hell out of me. I wondered what I had signed myself up for and could I keep up. I'm all about exploration. We will cover that a lot more in the upcoming sex chapter as well. But he was a tad overwhelming. I tried not to show it and tried to remain brave. Another version of love bombing. He was trying to get me hooked, either with the sex or with the drugs, one of the two. I will say, in the beginning at least, the sex was pretty fucking amazing, even though he rarely came. Narc number 2 had been the same way, and I was triggered, but at least Narc number 3 tried to assure me that it was quote unquote normal for him and that I shouldn't worry if he didn't have an orgasm because quote unquote it still felt amazing. Narc number 3 drew most of his supply from his sexcapades, even admitting to me that was quote unquote how he connected best with his partners. Now that I quote unquote speak narcissist, in his mind, he probably truly believes that he is good in the sack. As awesome as our experiences were, he most assuredly is not all that he thinks he is. You need to actually care about the other person you are being intimate with for it to be truly phenomenal, and he was only faking it. Plus, it was only good when he was on the drugs, and then he could never finish. Read on, dear friends, read on. The next red flag moment came when his fucking dealer came over after we had just had sex. I was still laying in his bed, covering my body with a blanket, when he walked in. When Narc number 3 waved his arm vaguely in my direction to introduce me, he conveniently forgot my fucking name. On purpose? Probably a devaluing tactic. I was both incredibly hurt and insanely offended. Wouldn't you be? He chalked it up to, I'm terrible with names. It's not just you, it's everybody. Again, I rationalized it away as, well, this guy obviously isn't a keeper. A keeper wouldn't do that to you. So, just keep viewing this as temporary and have fun. But I knew I was developing more feelings for him than I wanted to, and it was a huge crack to my self-esteem. Again, I was getting sent the message that I just wasn't important. Song Pearl by Katy Perry. Red flag sidebar. He was very proud of his butt, as was Narc number 1. Vanity was strong in all of them, as was fear of getting fat, getting old, and losing their looks. All narcs have weak, fragile egos. He commented once to me, "Wow, you have a flat ass," and giggled, then walked away. Another crack to the self-esteem. Pay attention to subtle digs like this. They are testing your reaction and therefore your boundaries. They are trying to devalue you and see what you'll take. P.S. Fuck you, dude. My ass is amazing and you know it. The stress of the feed store was even too much for me to handle in my fragile state. Much as I wanted to be, I just wasn't at the place I was telling myself I was mentally. The CPTSD from Narc number 2, unfortunately, still had its hold on me and my life, much as I hated to admit it. Combine this with the come down from Tina, more on that later, and I ended up quitting and wondering what the hell was I going to do now. I was always with Narc number 3 now, him at my place or me at his, and he was having problems with his roommate. We discussed at length we discussed the idea of me moving in, even though it was really fast. Truly a red flag for both of us that something was wrong. This was too fast. We were both gun shy about it because it was so fast. We both liked having our own space and jobs and cats. And then we both immediately quit our jobs and I moved in only 3 months after we had met. It was March 2021. I had some lessons to learn. What can I say? There is a part of me that suspects he was already on his way to getting fired or wanting to quit his job before we ever even met each other, but I don't have a way to prove my suspicions. It would explain why he would have tried to find someone he thought he had money. He knew he was about to be unemployed, so he needed a cash cow. Red flag. He claims that I forced this move upon him when we both discussed it in depth together. His claim that it was all me gives him a way to escape accountability and makes it all my fault when I left him. Number 3's motto, it's always someone else's fault. Well, no accountability is the Narc's motto, period. He had a motorcycle, and one of my goals for that year was to get a motorcycle license. I was experimenting with being a functional meth user at that point to see if it could be done, and I relied on Narc number 3 for advice on what to expect from using it since he was the pro. I got my license, but I took the class while in the grips of a come down from Tina with literally zero support from Narc number 3 at all. Honestly, that was one of the toughest experiences of my entire fucking life. Narc number 3 just didn't give a shit. He didn't give me any tips, any advice, any help at all on what to expect. He just watched me get out of bed every morning and dutifully go perform my responsibilities while he remained naked in bed watching porn and flopping his limp dick around, his favorite activity while high on Tina. Porn was also a big part of using Tina for Narc number 3. It was on all the time. I think he was trying to gaslight himself when he told me everyone watches porn way more than they admit to. He said he had seen it at drug parties back in his dealer days, especially in the gay scene, and said that it went hand in hand with Tina. I was just not aware of the truth of the matter like he was. Even though I was not a fan of it being on 24/7, I allowed it. Song Plotline by Emlyn. Everyone is different. That doesn't make it wrong. My mother, the doormat, ringing in my head. Porn was just on constantly in the beginning of our relationship. This is not normal. Some sort of boundary test to see just how much I would put up with, I'm sure. Oh, when I passed with flying colors, I was a fantastic enabler if it meant he'd love me for it. He stayed in bed naked for the majority of those first few months. Yes, months that we dated. Porn was on day and night with no break, and he, in a rare and weird display of empathy, put up a curtain between us in his bed so that when I wanted to sleep, the light from the screen wouldn't bother me. It allowed him to continue with his porn as he wanted without being disturbed and still have me nearby just in case I wanted to offer him my services. Oh, what a sweetheart. I roll. I look back and fucking laugh sometimes because even with the manipulation, lies, and abuse, it's just so comical, the life I was living with this guy. Why did I stay? Why did I put up with it all? Why? Because I was still seeking validation from outside of myself. I needed someone outside of me to tell me I was lovable and worthy because I just didn't feel that I was. We were having sex, but most of the time he was playing with his pecker, watching porn. I wondered why he preferred that over touching me. I found myself once again wondering if there was something wrong with me. Was I doing something wrong? Was I not attractive enough? Even though I was finally having the sex that I had been craving, there wasn't much romance or connection, and it didn't seem like I was enough for him if he was constantly masturbating. I was still going without the cuddling and the snuggling and drifting off to sleep together that I missed so much and never got with number 2. I was confused, sad, and feeling even more lonely than when he was right there beside me. Tina tends to affect the man's ability to stay hard and to come, by the way. This information I gathered from what I've been told by other users and what I've read online, and what I've experienced firsthand with my partners. So, for guys anyway, while it supposedly feels awesome, it can be frustrating to not be able to finish. Personally, I never had any problems in the orgasm department. Narc number 3 was jealous of my abilities and continually told me that I was blessed in that department. I took compliments from him wherever I could get them. So instead of doing anything productive at all or even thinking about trying to get another job, number 3 just remained naked in bed with his hand on his limp pecker for days at a time. In just a few months, he had worn out not 1, but 2 Hitachi magic wand vibrators on himself. I assumed it felt good enough to continue doing it, even without an orgasm at the end, but it was fucking weird. One day, his shoulder and neck hurt so bad from jacking off and watching porn for I don't know how many days in a row that he was forced to change positions in bed. He now had his head at the foot of the bed, looking left rather than right, and he could continue watching his precious porn at a different angle and not hurt himself that way. God forbid he should, just fucking stop for a bit. Red flag number, I don't know how many. Red flag. Narc number 3 always turned away from me when we were lying in bed together. It was an immediate trigger from the shit number 2 used to pull on the couch. I had learned all about body language and how to read it from decades of being around horses. These narcs can try to deny that shit all they want, but I recognized it for what it was. Clear, stay the fuck away from me, you're not invited to my party vibes. They were both just fine on their own, thanks, and didn't really give a fuck that it hurt anyone's feelings. In fact, I think that was the intention. Hurting people equals fuel to them. Infuriating that they are such cruel monsters. I can't tell you the number of times I cried myself to sleep lying right next to Narc number 3 as he triggered everything in me that number 2 had, and I wondered how the fuck I had found myself in the same place all over again. Song No Big Deal by Love and Rockets. Narc number 3, like number 2, needed constant noise. The demons in their heads are just too scary to listen to. They must be drowned out 24/7 with distraction. When he finally had exhausted the porn and sex portion of our relationship, we moved on to watching the same TV programs on repeat portion. Narcs don't like hearing their own brain tattletale on them about how awful of a human being they are. It repeats on a constant loop in their own head and makes them feel guilty. Instead of, God forbid, actually deciding not to be a piece of shit anymore and making the effort to actually change, they just drown it out with constant noise and chaos. I bet it's awful in there. Number 3's noise of choice, once his porn days were over, was some sort of cartoon on repeat. Usually Bob's Burgers, Family Guy, Archer, Rick and Morty, or something similar. I noticed it wasn't ever a show that got too personal or too emotional, which falls in line with a narc's inability to empathize with others, including characters on TV. Cartoons didn't require empathy. I got fucking sick of all of them, to be honest. While I love Bob's Burgers, the jingle now makes me cringe. It's like the song they play over and over while you're being tortured in prison. It gives me CPTSD flashbacks to that relationship when I hear it now. And how fucking fucked up is that? I need silence and darkness to sleep, like I think most normal people do. Narc number 3 and I were complete opposites in nearly every way right from the beginning. Red flag. It was that way with the others as well. I just always tried to ignore it or laugh it off. Opposites may attract, but if one is a narcissist, it ain't gonna work for long. I tried everything I could think of to try to sleep with his TV on, just so I could stay in his room with him. Earplugs, masks, headphones, curtains. We turned the volume way down. We turned the brightness way down. But I just couldn't sleep well. Turning it all the way off meant that he couldn't sleep well. And even though I was the one working, that just wasn't an option for him to put that much effort into. I even bought him a brand new mattress because his old one was literally falling apart and held together by threads. I thought maybe we'd both sleep better if we at least had good support, and I also thought he would appreciate just how hard I was trying to be able to sleep in the same bed as him. Nope. In the end, he just resented it, saying, "I never asked you to buy that mattress for me." The number of times I tried to show that boy how much better life would be if he would just see the signs the universe kept sending him, me being one of them, that would lead him to happiness, would be equal to the number of times he chose to ignore me and stay living in the dark, where he was comfortable in his wretchedness. Each night I would stay in bed with him until I was just so miserably uncomfortable that I had to go to my own room and get some sleep, feeling badly for leaving him alone every time, and often staying far longer in his room than I preferred just to take care of him and make him feel loved. Thank the universe we had our own separate bedrooms. At least I could retreat and actually get some sleep when I needed to. I would drag myself off to my room to sleep, once again feeling all alone, often crying and lonely and wondering why I couldn't get both the good sex and the connection. It just didn't seem fair. In his defense, the longer I lived in that house, the more number 3 seemed to realize that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't an asshole like seemingly everyone else on the planet he had dealings with. However, it wasn't enough to stop his manipulation. People were assholes to him for good reason. Another red flag. Listen to how many tales of bad luck narcs have had in their life. See life lesson number 9. Karma is real. The energy you put out in this world, you get back. If there's a theme of bad luck in all their tales, especially if it runs in the entire family, fucking run. If they seem the type that just, quote unquote, never seems to catch a break, fucking run. That is bad energy drawing more bad energy into its abyss of a black hole. You can't fix them. They broke it that way on purpose. They found a way to make it work for them. So just give up and run. Let them stay broken. They like it that way. It's the perfect trap to lure in unsuspecting victims. Save yourself. In the first few months of us, quote unquote, dating, if you want to call it that, he rarely left his bedroom because of the porn. I, meanwhile, had found another job grooming horses before I had even moved in with him. Finally finding the low-stress job I was looking for, combined with low-rent living, sharing cost with narc number 3, I discovered I was happy about that part of my life and where it was going. I was content working a low-stress job, and I felt like I was enough for once, even if I was just barely getting by. The one bright spot in this relationship was finding horses and going back to my country roots again. I was the one doing the grocery order and pickup every single week. I was cleaning the house, which was fucking filthy, and redecorating. I was rearranging the kitchen as I figured out how we could assimilate our shit. I even moved myself into his house alone, loading and unloading a U-Haul by myself while he remained in bed with Tina and porn as much as possible. He did nothing, and I was the perfect enabler. It was the exact mother-child dynamic that I had hated with narc number 2. Song Boys Will Be Boys by Emlyn. One of narc number 3's favorite fighting tools was stonewalling. He would shut himself in his room when he knew we had things to talk about and always be too tired or not in the mood or too high to talk to me. The same shit narc number 2 used to pull when it came to sex. You can't force someone to talk to you, and spending days stewing on a subject without resolve is just not healthy, and narcs know that. Victims usually give up trying to talk and just drop it, which is exactly what a narcissist wants. No accountability. After I moved in, I found it oppressive how much of his ex-wife's artwork remained in his house. He had described her to be the worst kind of monster, so I couldn't understand why he would want to keep her stuff hanging around. If he had told me that she was a wonderful person, I wouldn't have minded, but she was supposedly insanely abusive to him, so I didn't like looking at her shit. I worded it as kindly as I could, but I did ask if he could please cover up his ex-wife's art on the front of a particular cabinet, as every time I walked by it, I felt like her eyes were on me. His response? Well, that's your problem to get over, not mine, and scoffed a laugh. Ouch. He's a quick one, though, and saw opportunity. He could turn this to his advantage twice over if he played his cards right. He had already caused emotional harm to me when I was being kind and vulnerable, which was a win for him, and now he could at the same time become the good guy by painting over her artwork like I had kindly requested in the beginning. Voila! He had suddenly gone from bad guy to savior in one fell swoop. Now I would have to thank and praise him even after he had caused me psychological damage when I had opened up to him about my feelings and been hurt for it. What a goddamn mind fuck. Our infamous camping trip on March 17th, 2021 was another demonstration of the depravity, and I could not give a shit less about other people way of thinking these fucking narcissists live with. I feel obligated to share the entire ridiculous experience. Here we go. When I got home after this disastrous field trip, I immediately grabbed my journal and wrote down what had happened, specifically so I would not forget. I wanted to keep all the insanely offensive details clear in my memory. And I am so glad I did, because I had forgotten all the shitty little bits of just how atrociously he treated me on that trip. And I'm flabbergasted that I gave him another chance and stuck around. Here's the story. Can I take a sip of tea before we start with the tea? Let me clear my throat. Let's call this intermission. Here's the story. He had agreed to join his also flamingly narcissistic friend for a weekend to camp at the beach. I had been off Tina at this point because it had been fucking with my breathing, which is no fun when you're outside working with horses. I would use Tina occasionally on the weekends only, but I was still getting up and going to work and doing all the responsible things I still had to do to live my life, which is more than I can say for number 3. He had not been looking forward to this camping trip, but had committed to it, so he felt he couldn't back out. Before we even left the house, he was miserable, and it seemed like he was taking everybody down with him. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay home. And instead of being an adult and just saying, no, I can't make it, he showed up and threw a tantrum the whole time. That way, no one could say he backed out. He would show up and quote-unquote do his duty, but be such an oppressively self-obsessed asshole about it that only another narcissist like his friend wouldn't pick up on his terrible behavior and say, what the fuck, man? Always a backdoor, always slippery, always an excuse with these narcissists. He had unloaded and loaded his truck by himself that day while I had been at work with the horses. I had been offering to help him unload said truck for a week, but no, he waited to do it himself at the very last minute. Fine. He was overheated and tired from finally having to get out of bed and actually do something for a change, all while complaining about how his drugs just weren't hitting like they should. Poor baby. I roll again. Me, still being in enabler mode, felt badly for him. So I drove his truck to the campsite while he napped in the seat next to me while I sweetly rubbed his arm to help him feel better. Keep in mind that I had worked all week and that morning. But hey, I was tough. And I felt I had a lot to prove, obviously. Song Secrets by Pink. Setting up the tent when we got there was a fiasco in and of itself. Once a year, every year, since the age of about 5 years old, my dad and I have gone camping at the Frog Jump in Angels Camp, California. I am also from Texas. I know how to camp. I was trying to help them put up the tent, and number 3 was being very good at making me feel incompetent, so I just decided to back off and let them do it without me. Sometimes removing yourself from the situation is the only thing to do, so that's what I did. I had been asking him all week what I should plan to bring for food because I already could tell by his lack of preparation that this was not going to go well and was trying to buffer myself. I asked what clothes I might need because I didn't know what camping at this beach site was like, and he had said he went there every year. Not once did he tell me what to bring or what kind of weather to expect. He just said, bring what you want. This is how camping with 2 raging narcissists go. Neither one fully commits to doing anything. Both only half-ass shows up and tries to get the other one to do all the hard work, trying to weasel out a responsibility as much as possible because they are lazy fuckers. And then they lie to everybody on social media about how they are having the best time of their lives. It was ridiculous to watch. No one had a cooler of food or drink. No one bought charcoal or wood or anything. Totally unprepared and not the way I was used to camping at all. Frustration supreme. Instead of spending sunset on the beach, we went to Walmart to buy the provisions we should have already had. Leaving the campsite, I mentioned that they might lock the gate and not allow re-entry because that had been my general experience with the way most campsites work. Oh, Narc number 3 assured me that that's not the way this one worked, and I crossed my fingers that he was right. I tried to enjoy our Walmart trip as much as I could, and we got our supplies and returned to the site to a locked gate and tire spikes. I didn't appreciate having to deal with his karmic lessons, but there we were. Just as I had feared, they had locked the gate, and we had no way to get over the spikes. Because I had camped in my previous life, I knew a way to get around it. I suggested laying the wood we had just bought as firewood down over the spikes and aligning his tires carefully enough to drive over them. And I'll be damned if it didn't work. My ingenuity saved the day, but it was nerve-wracking and not the way I wanted to spend my evening. He, of course, spun the story to show how smart he was to overcome this silly obstacle that could never keep anyone as clever as him down. I don't remember what we ate, but we did finally eat, and I was starving. His friend had lit the wood way too early, so it had completely burned to ash not long after the sun had gone down, and I was getting freezing cold without a fire. My thoughts of a nice romantic weekend spent around a campfire under the stars on the beach with the guy I loved was dead on arrival. Song Narcissist by Avery Anna. I was cold. I hate being cold. I hate being cold more than anything. I was cold a lot at his house, which meant I was miserable at his house most of the time. I had a whole night of being cold to look forward to here as well. I was not happy. Narc number 3 didn't seem to notice or care about my comfort and told me that he had a fantasy about having sex in the campsite shower. He rarely took showers at home, and when he did, they were not the blazingly hot ones that I enjoyed. I was already cold. We had no more wood to burn, and the idea of being cold and wet in a shower on my knees giving him a blowjob or just being there to be a sexual object for him, only to return to a cold sleeping bag, just didn't sound like fun to me. I told him I was sorry, but no, I would not be accompanying him to the showers. This one rejection set the tone for the rest of the trip. He took it personally because he couldn't have any empathy for my experiences. I had rejected him in his damaged brain. No bueno. He went to take a shower alone, and I bundled up in my sleeping bag in the tent and waited for him to return. I waited and waited and eventually fell asleep. I woke up at 2 a.m, and I was still alone. I grabbed my phone. No text. I texted him, worried that maybe he'd passed out somewhere or, God forbid, overdosed in the bathroom. I was concerned and worried. I texted, "Where are you? Are you okay?" He texted back that he was in the truck and that he was fine. Knife to the gut. What a selfish, inconsiderate move. I had told him I was cold, and he chose being warm by himself in his truck cab over spending time with his girlfriend in a romantic setting, or at the very least including me in on the warmth. I had rejected him, and I deserved punishment in his brain. He was having a grand time with Tina and porn, warm in the cab of his truck by himself. I didn't even cross his mind. I cried myself back to sleep. When we got up in the morning, we needed another run to Walmart for some reason. I think we ran out of charcoal. By the time we came back, the breakfast his friend had supposedly made for us had all been eaten by birds. So, riding another wave of frustration, I said I was going to take a walk for myself to calm down. I even texted that to him because I believe this was one of the times when he had disappeared off to go to the bathroom and no one really knew where he was or how long he'd be gone. This trip was marked by me asking, "Where the hell is he?" a lot. I found a bench and sat and watched the waves and listened to music for about an hour, trying to calm down. I tried to remember the "not my circus, not my monkeys" mantra, and after a while, when I hadn't heard anything, I decided to walk back to the site. Upon returning, his friend informed me that they had been waiting for me so that they could all go down to the beach. If anyone had texted and told me that, then I would have returned sooner. Why hadn't anyone texted me? And where was Narc number 3? Song Part of Me by Katy Perry. No one knew where he was again. When he finally returned from the bathroom, where he was always off getting high, by the way, in case you didn't figure that out, we went down to the beach, and we all pretended like everything was fine for about 30 minutes. Then number 3 said that he had to go to the truck for something and disappeared again. We waited for him to return for a good 30 minutes more before giving up and going to the truck ourselves. I found him there, frantically searching for a meth pipe that he couldn't find. He was desperate to keep his friend from knowing what he was doing when it came to Tina. We returned to the campsite, and I sat down with his friends while he continued looking for whatever paraphernalia he had lost in his truck. I asked his friend if number 3 was always like this when they went camping. His friend said, "No, usually he's way more organized, but he seems like he's really focused on whatever he's doing right now, so I'll leave him alone." I walked over to the truck to tell him, "Hey, your friend is asking about you, and we're all here to spend time with you, and We really haven't had a chance to do that at all. Can you come hang out with us?" At that honest request for his time and companionship, he snapped and yelled at me, saying it was not his responsibility to entertain us. At first terribly hurt by this response, that emotion didn't last long. I was getting good and angry now. I informed him that I was not going to spend another night freezing in a sleeping bag in the tent alone, and that if he was going to spend the night warm in his truck, then I wanted to do that as well. I then took a nap in the tent because I was emotionally exhausted at that point and needed to rest. And when I woke up, he had actually prepared a bed for me under the camper of his truck. Just enough breadcrumbs to give me hope that maybe he still cared about me and my well-being. That night I climbed in the camper bed to sleep, but he remained in the cab portion of the truck, so I was still all alone. He told me that if I needed him, all I had to do was knock on the window separating the cab from the camper and he would answer. I did knock a couple of times. He never responded, ignoring me seemingly on purpose. So I did what I always did and just figured shit out on my own. He ignored my knocks when I needed help. But what he did do was send me a text to see if I wanted to have sex with him in the truck cab and fulfill yet another fantasy of his. I informed him that no, I didn't feel particularly close to him at that moment after all that we had been going through. Sorry. I was definitely not interested and actually pretty fucking offended that he had asked. Did he have any empathy at all? No, he's a narcissist. Did he care how I felt at all? The answer here is no. Emphatically no. He was only thinking of himself, and I didn't know if that was him or Tina or what, but I was at my limit. Silence from him for a while, and then about 30 minutes later, he had the nerve to text and ask me the same question again, just to be sure that I hadn't changed my mind. What the fuck? The entitlement of a narcissist blows my mind. Nope, hadn't changed my mind about being used as nothing more than a hole, buddy. Thanks. Fucking ice pick to the heart. How cold could you be, dude? When I woke up the next morning and he started accusing me of ruining his weekend, I said, I am fucking out of here. I loaded my bag, I grabbed my shit, and I started walking my happy ass down to the entrance of the campsite, back to where the tire spikes were, to get picked up by an Uber and taken to the nearest train station. I was livid. It didn't help that when I got to the train station, I found that the next train wasn't until later that evening. It was morning. I had to do what I hated most. I had to call my dad at my most vulnerable point and ask for help. As always, my dad showed up for me, and this time he didn't make me feel too guilty. I won't fault him for that. He may bitch about it, but he is always there for me when I get in desperate need. I just wish I didn't feel so judged every time he helped me. One good thing about having an Narc for a dad is that he doesn't pry. I didn't have to tell him a whole lot of what just went down, and at this point, he didn't even know that I was already living with Narc number 3. I didn't want to feel judged by him, so I hadn't even told him yet. I was establishing my new boundaries with him as well, and figuring out that I didn't need to share all the details of my life with him was a new one that I was practicing. Lesson learned here, by the way. Always take your own vehicle, if you can, because being trapped somewhere is not fun. I would have left a lot sooner if my own car had been there. Upon returning to the house, I sent my dad home immediately and started packing my shit. I was done. I was living with another fucking narcissist. I knew it now. It was a for sure thing. And I was going to move out. Low rent wasn't worth the torture. Narc number 3 eventually came home and was just astonished that all my stuff had already been boxed up and I was ready to move out that day if need be. Moss does not grow under my feet when I make up my mind. I requested he give me just some more time to figure out where I was moving to next, since I liked my job and didn't really want to move to LA with my dad. Well, he tried to gaslight me that very same night. We were officially broken up, and I knew he had friends over to the house. I had heard them, yet he tried to tell me that he didn't. I locked my bedroom door that night and went to sleep. The next morning, I went to his room to give him something, knocked on his door, and when he opened it, there was someone in his bed. It was a slender-built gay man, what he referred to as a twink, whom I had never met before. The stranger waggled his fingers hello at me and smirked. I was jealous, hurt, and angry. I didn't say anything, though. I just returned to my room and shut the door. Good Girl, song, Good Girl by Carrie Underwood. Narc number 3, of course, insisted it wasn't what I thought it was. Looking back, it sure sounds like gaslighting to me, but I guess we'll never know. I have learned to live with a lot of unanswered questions with these people. Even if I asked the narcs today, I wouldn't ever get the truth. I don't even think they really know the truth. They are in such denial. They convince themselves of their own reality, and the truth is usually not a part of it. This is when he apologized and persuaded me to stay living there just as roommates and friends because we were both benefiting financially. Since I was enjoying the situation with my horse job and low rent, I decided to see if I could make it work. For a little while we did, but eventually I got lonely and I missed human contact. I gradually started hanging out in his room more and more, just as friends, but we all know how that ends. I mentioned earlier that narcs always call themselves out if you listen. They either know a lot about narcissists or they say they've been accused of being one in the past. This is where you come in, assuring them that no, they are not one because narcissists don't self-evaluate enough to question if they might be one. By simply questioning if he might be one, he passed the test. But apparently this is not a foolproof test. Narc number 3 mentioned early in the relationship that his ex-wife had looked up the definition of narcissist on his phone so that he would later find it. He mentioned again a bit later that he wondered if he might be a narcissist. Me. No way. You're a good person. He was not a good person. He was just pretending to be one for the camera. Red flag. He had only ever dated people 20 years younger than him. I was the first person his age he'd ever dated. He got a hold of his poor ex-wife when she was in her 20s and he was in his 40s and told me all kinds of horror stories about her that I can only assume were things that he did because he is the king of projection. I've experienced that firsthand from him. Wherever she is, I'd love to talk to her. I'm glad she got out and went zero contact with him, which he still whines about. I'm glad she kept her phone too, because for some fucked up reason it just chapped his hide that she got to keep her iPhone just because he bought it for her. Dick. He also got super pissed when I returned the Apple TV that I bought him for his birthday after I figured out our relationship was a lie and that he deserved no gifts from me at all. He has some weird attachments and he feels entitled to gifts and things, but certainly not to people. People are far more disposable to him. His kids included. Song Bleed Out by Blue October. Another red flag, when talking about his ex-girlfriends or his friends' girlfriends, he would never use their name. I called him on it and said, for someone who claims to be a feminist, you're depersonalizing them by not using their names when you speak about them. I was spot on in this diagnosis. He is not a feminist and only claims to be one in order to be viewed as altruistic when he is not. I have a lot more notes on this narc, and these memories are fresh because it was only a month ago that I really finally left. And just like the last two, going back through all my notes, I find time after time. I called it. He was a narcissist. I just wasn't yet strong enough to leave him. Honestly, I could include so many more instances and tiny details of abuse from each of these guys, but I just don't have enough room, and I doubt the general public cares that much about the intricacies of what I experienced. I'm just highlighting the real winners, and there's plenty of those. Red flag, much like number 2 thinking that a girl who had just been crying was quote-unquote beautiful. When I apologized to narc number 3 one time for being a train wreck, he responded, "Train wrecks turn me on." I had my last utterly terrifying experience with meth on July 26, 2021. We will cover that in the upcoming drugs chapter. Narc number 3, however, was still hot and heavy with Tina. Number 3 had said he was clean for part of our relationship, but I look back and do not believe that for 1 second. I caught him with what he called powdered donuts on his nose when we were at a Halloween convention where he was swearing he was clean. This is what he called the white powder residue on your nose after you just snorted Tina through a bumper. Powdered donuts. He had said he was clean, so when he brought down his COVID mask and I saw it, I called him on it. He denied that that's what it was. Gaslighting. Explaining it away as having a runny nose and it just being dried up snot. His neurotic behavior the rest of the day was a clear indication that he was, as I suspected, on Tina the whole time. At the end of our relationship, he guiltily came clean that he hadn't been sober during the times that he had told me that he had been. Surprise! He then admitted to lying by omission, a favorite trick of narcs, by telling me that if I had only asked him if he was on Tina, he would have told me. But because I never asked, he never volunteered it. Oh, turn the page. That way, it was my fault for not just asking him. They can rationalize and justify nearly everything if it benefits them. I'm pretty sure he was on Tina during our entire relationship, including when I met him. And that's also a part of why I didn't know who it was I was dating, and I still don't. Song Revenge by Ministry. Dating a drug addict had certainly not been on my bucket list of things to do, and yet I had clearly set myself up for it. The perfect doormat, the perfect supportive enabler. When he saw that I was really leaving, he dangled the "I'll go to rehab" carrot, but I didn't bite. To this day, as far as I know, he has not gone to rehab, and it's just yet another example of future faking. And just like the other two, in going through all my notes and tales of misery, I wonder why the fuck I didn't think higher of myself and tell this guy to go to hell. Over and over I called it. I named the blame shifting, the self-centeredness, the never at fault, the always the victim, the no accountability, the no responsibility, the using, the stonewalling, the lack of empathy, the lack of respecting boundaries, all of it I called out in my journal. Yet I stayed. I'm sure other victims of abuse can empathize. As if I didn't need any of the above reasons to break it off with this guy, the one thing that finally did it is quite a simple and bare minimum request that he, like my father, just couldn't give me. He didn't listen to me. I wasn't heard, I wasn't seen, I wasn't important, and he really didn't care about me at all. There had been repeated instances of his eyes just glazing over whenever I talked anything at all that wasn't involving him directly. He just wasn't interested, no matter how much he claimed to be. 2 different instances he fell asleep while I was talking to him about things that were important to me. It was a pattern, and honestly, it felt like he was doing it on purpose. That's a real ego shatterer, let me tell you. Am I that boring? After the first time he fell asleep mid-conversation, I asked him if next time, when he feels too tired to listen, could he please just stop me and say, "Babe, I want to listen, but I can't right now. I'm nodding off." This way I could hit the pause button, no harm, no foul, and we could continue the conversation when he was more awake and focused. That's respectful. That's considering the other person's feelings. That's what adults do. That's something he couldn't fucking do. Why? Because narcissists truly don't care what you have to say. Plus, it's a way for them to gain narcissistic supply by making you feel unimportant. There was one particularly disastrous trip to Not Scary Farm that I wish I could elaborate on, but I won't. He would ignore my texts and Facebook tags and posts on purpose, claiming that he got shitty phone service. Like every narcissistic abuse victim, the barrage of mental anguish and questioning of myself was just fucking constant. He tried to get me to switch to an Apple iPhone, just like the last 2 narcs had, without offering to buy me one, of course. I've come to find out it's because iPhones allow you to see when someone reads texts or when they're typing, etc. Narcs like Apple products because their software helps them keep tab on their victims. Song, So What? By Pink. More of a reason to be an Android user. He had cameras all over his house, just like any paranoid narcissist and addict would. He had dentures, but claimed it was from bad DNA and not meth use. Right. He did the whole I can fart but you can't thing that Narc number 2 had. He told me repeatedly that I had terrible taste in music, knowing full well how important my music is to me. Any TV show I wanted to watch was bad or triggering, or something was wrong with it. He purposely sabotaged anniversaries. When I was sick, he sulked because the attention wasn't on him. When I had surgery, I received no help other than him driving me to and from the doctor. He even punched me directly in my stitches during the night when he was supposedly high and passed out. He claimed it was accidental. Right. Great aim. He even creeped into my room in his leather doggy bondage mask in the middle of the night while I was recuperating from passing painful kidney stones, hoping to have sex. I kicked him out of my room rapidly. The guy has zero empathy. He only cares about himself and his own gratification. He and I DJ'd his sister's wedding together, where his lack of empathy was once again on full display. Another instance of me catching powdered donuts on his face occurred at this wedding. I am taking the credit for that entire wedding going as smoothly as it did when it came to the music. I was the one who had purchased the software for his music to work. I was the one who put the playlist together for the entire event while he was high in bed. I was the one who kept him motivated when he didn't want to do it. I was his cheerleader, and instead of shining, he sulked because he wasn't getting treated like the rock star he thought he was. He had me do at least half the work, queuing up each song and moving all of his equipment. We were both cold and miserable by the end of it, but rather than appreciate that I was there by his side as a teammate and being grateful for my help, he sat, arms folded the majority of the time, brooding about how miserable he was. On the way home, I pumped him up as having done such a good job and being so proud of him that at least by the time we got home, he wasn't being quite such an emotional fucking vampire. I had never been more thrilled to retreat to my room and get away from his draining energy. Song Dirt Room by Blue October. During one of our many breakups, he said we should make a list of what we both want in a quote-unquote ideal partner. At a time when he was supposedly clean, he wasn't. And he was supposedly finding couples therapy for us. Again, he wasn't. Reading the list he gave me, I was impressed with the spelling because that was not one of his strong points. I chalked it up to him probably using autocorrect. However, in another hindsight moment, I looked over that list again recently and realized there is no fucking way that he wrote that. I believe that his ex-wife sent him that list and he just printed it out and presented it to me as his own. The language and spelling should have been a dead giveaway. That is most certainly not the way he communicates. And again, I have a pang of compassion for that poor girl and what she must have experienced with him. I've heard his story, but I'd really like to hear hers. It's probably much closer to the truth. He really overreacted once because I liked a song about how the ex-girlfriend was bummed because the new girlfriend was hotter and out of the guy's league. The song is called Hot by Marissa Maino. I thought it was kind of cute and funny and shared that with him one day. He fucking lost his mind and snapped at me that it was not kind of you to even consider that thought. He told me that I was terrible for finding the song cute and he thought that it was just awful. It was just such an over-the-top and weird reaction to a song that I said I liked. Either he knew his ex was a good person and didn't deserve my dislike, and he felt guilty for lying about how terrible she was, or he did not appreciate the line in the song about me being out of his league. Either way, his inappropriate burst of anger is just another demonstration of how toxic people keep you walking on eggshells. You just never know what might set them off. Song Leave Me Alone by Tucker Beathard. Betty Crocker Blueberry Muffin Mix in the box. That's what broke us up for good. I put it on the grocery list exactly like that. Betty Crocker Blueberry Muffin Mix in the box. As specific as I could be to prevent any errors. I also had explained to him in the past exactly why this was important to me for Christmas morning. He knew. When he returned from the store with a different brand, I first took a breath and calmed myself. I asked as calmly as possible, were they out of the brand that I asked for? He responded curtly, knowing what was coming, because he set me up. We never cared about brand names before. I just grabbed something. I again very calmly responded back, well, yes, it mattered. That's the whole reason I wrote it down so specifically. And play ball! Now I had hurt his poor little ego. He responded with rage because I did not appreciate the fact that he had just gone grocery shopping for us. You know, the same exact thing that I had been doing for our entire relationship by myself. He yelled at me about how I was impossible to please and too demanding. He had set it up this way on purpose to elicit a response that would give him some narcissistic supply and at the same time make it look like I was being unappreciative. This is how narcs manipulate, lie, and deceive people while still covering their ass. I didn't praise a narc enough for doing the bare minimum and called him out for purposely not getting me what I had asked for. That's a no-no. They absolutely require a huge pat on the back for the bare fucking minimum every time. I tried to stay calm, but I felt the tears rising in me. I cried, so literally, even when I write it down in black and white, you just aren't listening to me. What do I even do with that? I ran out of the kitchen sobbing into my bedroom where I closed my door so that I could sit in peace and regroup my hurt feelings, cry and let it out, and calm down. He, however, would not respect my boundaries and came to my door to scream at me. Again, about how ungrateful I was and how terrible I was. I was trapped behind a door in what I had thought was my safe space. My boundaries were being completely ignored, violated, attacked. I did not feel safe at all. Eventually, I'm screaming back at him through the closed door to just leave me alone and go away. I am not listening to you, so just go away. Reactive abuse, once again. It took more than one round of me screaming at him through a closed door for him to finally leave. When I saw my boundaries being crossed like that, I knew I had to get out immediately. Within 2 days, I had done just that, and I had finally moved out of the house for good in December of 2021. Song Circle the Drain by Katy Perry. Narc number 3's main goal had been, quote unquote, to beat Narc number 2 in the length of time that we had dated, which had been 10 months. Red flag. Why was he so interested in beating a terrible relationship? Weren't we planning on being together forever? The joke's on him, though. We did not beat Narc number 2. I had known Narc number 2 for a year, and then we dated for 10 months. I was on and off with Narc number 3 for 10 months, and if we count all the time in between when we were off, we definitely did not beat my relationship with Narc number 2. So sorry, bro, you didn't even accomplish that. Wah, wah. When I left, he did what narcs do. He tried to triangulate my family against me. He created a text group, a group chat, telling everyone in it what a miserable human I was and how horribly I had treated him. Luckily, they all clearly saw the crazy in his ranting, inaccurately spelled texts, and assured me that they put zero stock into whatever he was saying because they knew who I was and that it was all bullshit. Thank the universe that my family loves me, even when I'm a crazy dick sometimes. My dad questioned my need to explain or defend myself to him and the rest of the family. I explained that that's what you do when your character is under attack. You try to defend it. As a narc himself, I don't think he could relate because in his mind it was all simply laughable. Why on earth would anyone else's opinion matter? If I was a healthy individual, it wouldn't matter, and I wouldn't feel the need to defend myself, but I was a narcissistic abuse victim. I wasn't healthy enough to fend off accusations and be solid in my own worth just yet. I hadn't yet learned to be solid in my truth. Narc number 3 then moved from angry accusatory texts to threats of calling the police for what I don't know. I certainly didn't want any of his trash. I didn't take or destroy anything, but narcs are excellent with talk and empty threats. This was just another one. Shortly after that, he changed tactics back to apologizing and attempting to hoover me back in. each time complaining about how miserable he was and what he felt he should have, never once expressing regret or showing concern for my pain or what I might have been experiencing in any way. Lisa A. Romano says narcissists don't see other people as 3D individuals. After being made to feel like I was nothing more than a hole, a cum dumpster, if you will, by Narc number 3 on multiple occasions, despite his professions of love and adoration that I never saw produced and certainly never felt, I agree with that statement. After handling myself admirably well and maturely throughout his barrage of texting attacks, I told him I would no longer allow the abuse he directed at me. I deserved better. I told him that I hoped he would go to rehab and find peace, and then I did what you must do with all narcs. I went zero contact and blocked him everywhere I possibly could. And that's the end of chapter 10. I will say, I gave him a copy of my book because it woke me up. He's who woke me up. So after my book was published, I dropped off a signed copy to his house and said, thank you for waking me up, and that I hope this book wakes you up as well. So, yeah, there's that signed copy out in existence somewhere. Maybe it'll show up one day. Who knows? So there's chapter 10. Thanks for tuning in and sticking around. This was an hour and 11 minutes. Fucking perfect, because guess what's next? Chapter 11, guys. Magical. Thanks for sticking around. Like, share, and subscribe. Education is everything. Love you guys. Bye.